Hello everybody, this is Steve Ducker, editor of Demolition and Recycling International magazine, and with me I have a very special guest. He's Richard Vann, founder and managing director of the RVA Group and D&Ri magazine columnist. Richard, along with his RVA colleagues, is celebrating the 30th anniversary of the founding of the company this year, and he's going to run through some of his memories and some of his thoughts on how the industry is now. Perhaps, Richard, and welcome and thanks for joining us. Perhaps you could, as a start, just outline what the RVA Group does, please.
Oh, thanks, and hi, Steve. Thank you for asking me to join you today. So RVA Group is a specialist project management, technical engineering, health and safety organisation, but targeted specifically at the decommissioning sector. So that's demolition, dismantling, decontamination, that area. And over the last 30 years, we've stayed within that core comfort zone, if you like, of our business, and we are very much a client-facing organisation. So our income, our clients are owners and operators, in principle, of large-scale, high-hazard, complex assets in the, say, chemical, petrochemical, power sectors as examples.
Well, congratulations on the 30 years.
Thank you.
Perhaps if we can go back to just before the start of the RVA Group, what were you doing at the time?
I was in the demolition contracting business. I was a director of a company called Controlled Demolition Group, and we were working in the power sector, power station demolition, and also heavily involved in the early days of high-rise demolition, residential blocks and commercial blocks by the use of explosives.
What was the demolition and decommissioning landscape like when RVA started? Because to me, as a Briton, 1992 conjures up Black Wednesday and all sorts of financial uncertainty. So what made you go in this new direction?
I've been working for a couple of organisations and hearing stories of issues that clients, owners and operators were having in respect of managing their decommissioning programmes. And there was no independent middle organisation that could assist these companies. So you had the owner of the asset and you had the contractor and nothing in between, totally the opposite to the case where you'd have in construction, you'd have a client, you'd have a team of structural engineers, project managers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and all those professional services that would support the project. That didn't exist, and I felt that there was a window of opportunity there to start something that could fill that gap.
So from that position of seemingly having no obvious role models to follow, 30 years later, you're an international company. Did you have any thoughts in 1992 that it might be an international company? And what sort of opportunities were around at that time for you to do that?
I think from the very early days, obviously, I wasn't looking at the international scene. It was more of taking an idea that was novel at the time, to try and fill this gap in the market, which I felt existed, but I had to convince other people it existed, and that there was a benefit of value being added by an intermediary coming into a demolition decommissioning project that would add value not just to the client but to the contractor as well. So it was more about, can I get this thing started? Can I get sufficient momentum to turn it into a business. And I would think probably in the first 2 to 3 years, that was the focus of my attention, is to actually, get a head of steam up and make it into a business.
So what sort of size and scale of operation did you start out with, and how does that compare to what you have now?
Well, when I started off, it was, without wanting to sound too twee, it was writing the first specification for a project we had on the kitchen table in a cottage in West Yorkshire somewhere. So it was me, and it was difficult, obviously, to be the administrator, the project manager, the salesperson, and what have you. So it was very much a cottage industry when it started.
And the growth from that period in the 30 years.
And the growth was, I think the first associate that came on board was probably at the end of year one. And then a couple of years later, another project manager came on board, and eventually it picked up momentum, and we grew to the size that we are today. But it's been a progressive thing. There's been obviously peaks and troughs as workloads have changed. But one of the main principles that I started from and have kept to is that, first of all, that all our income comes from owners and operators of assets. So we don't do any work for demolition contractors as such. And that's not because we don't like them, it's because we have to have a level of independence and integrity, and we can't be seen to work on both sides of the fence. And also that our employees or our resources are directly employed by RVA. So we're not an organisation that uses consultants or independent project managers as and when we need them. I've always felt that to have stability, to have credibility, uniformity of training, standards, flexibility to fill gaps when people aren't available, or the certain skill sets that we need, that that they have to be part of a company. So I was always focused on building a unit where everybody has an ownership and a feeling of being a part of something that has got some substance.
So what was the first project that, in your opinion, really put RVA on the map, and what was technically significant about that?
The first real project, we'd been working for 2 to 3 years on what I would call small one-off projects, writing reports, managing small decommissioning demolition projects. And then by pure chance, I came across somebody at a IDE seminar who had gone to the seminar the night before the event, because the weather was so bad and he travelled a long way. And I also did this same thing for the same reason. So we were in this huge hotel, and there was only 2 of us there. And we started talking at the bar. What are you here for? Well, I'm coming here for a demolition conference. Oh, well, I'm speaking, and etc., etc. And this guy had actually was a manager of a power plant at a paper mill in Kent. And he told me what he was looking for, and I said, well, maybe we can help you. And we went our separate ways and what have you. And about a year later, he called me and said, do you want to come down and look at our power station? And, winding forward, after a long process, he managed to convince his directors that RVA were the people to go with. And again, at that time, there was only me and one other person. And it was that project that really, not just because of the scale of it, and it was, a quantum leap from the value of projects that we'd been doing, but the complexity. It was a live plant, operational paper mill. The power station that to be demolished was only 15 feet away from a new gas turbine power station that was now feeding the mill. And there was a lot of complexities around the condition of the asbestos, the size of the actual plant that had to be taken down in a very confined area. So I think, you know, if any one project sort of changed us from, you know, sort of Conference League to Premier League, if I can use that analogy, then that was the one, and it put us on a very sound footing.
Yeah. So what else have you done in the 26, 27 years since that contract that stands out? What are the highlights?
Well, there's lots of highlights. There's lots of projects where we've you know, won contracts with global organizations that we never thought we would get a look in as such a small company. I suppose one of the significant milestones for us was the first project we got in Asia, in Singapore, a very large project for an American-owned organization. And in many ways, because of the type of project, because of the legislative and cultural differences of working in that area, the fact that we were working on a completely different time zone, and it was the first long-term posting of RVA resources overseas, taught us a lot about operating at distance, setting up branches and companies overseas. So I guess in terms of, you know, a leap forward for RVA, that was one of the main ones, and obviously that gave us a lot of learning for how to do it in other countries as we are now. I mean, for instance, as we speak, we are undertaking our first project in South America, and we've got resources over there now. And, you know, going back to your earlier question, did I think day one that we'll be doing projects in South America? Probably not.
So how has the role of engineers in demolition evolved in the 30 years?
From our perspective, significantly. You know, we've gone from being the, if you like, the safety net for the client, and then we've got somebody that knows that the legislation can make sure that things are being carried out in accordance with the site rules, and it's as much for the client's protection as it is for anybody else. But also now we are very much you know, quite often involved as part of the client's team, so we'll get involved a lot earlier in projects rather than just when the demolition's being done, you know, in terms of developing strategies, looking at long-term asset management plans. You know, we're working quite extensively in the nuclear sector at the moment on these type of things. So our role has changed, and also, you know, contractors have changed. That in many cases, you know, their style. There is, you know, a lot more professionalism across the board. It's become much more of an engineered science rather than the sort of well, let's make it up on the day and we'll see what happens type of approach. So in 30 years, there's been, you know, tremendous changes, and that's not to say that there aren't still lots of changes to make, but, you know, it has come a long way. And you know, I could wax, you know, lyrically for the next 2 or 3 hours on that one, Steve. So I'll perhaps draw a line under that question there.
But it's interesting what you say about contractors and how they've changed, and I guess that points up that the wider industries the wider demolition industries had to face a lot of challenges in the 30 years that you've been operating, and to an extent it's overcome a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think, without overplaying our role, I'd like to think we've brought some something to the table. You know, we have been accused of being very pedantic, very demanding, but to a certain degree, I make no apologies for that. The important thing for us, and it's always been our prime driver, is that people go home safe. And I think contractors are very much the same. In the main, you're always going to get people and organisations that have lesser standards. You know, I think one of the articles I did for your publication some time ago was about there aren't degrees of safety. It's either safe or it's not safe. You can't have, well, we'll do it almost safe because that's better than not safe at all. That's not good enough. So I think, you know, things have changed, things continue to be changed, and continue to have to change, and you know, we can't afford to take our eye off the ball. That's for sure.
What do you think the challenges are for the future?
I think there's always challenges. What are they for the future? You know, I haven't got a crystal ball, but I think very much that certainly for the demolition contracting industry, if we're talking as a UK base, as an example, is that you know, eventually the sort of the industrial landscape is changing to the point where you know, is there going to be enough work to feed the industry here at the size that it is for the types of work? The opportunities overseas are probably more attractive in a lot of ways. One of the reasons that RVA is doing so much work outside the UK is because that is where the opportunities lie, or a lot of them. And that's not to say that we're dismissing the UK. We've got a number of projects running. One of the things that we have found is that the barriers to entry in Europe have been raised significantly since Brexit. We're working in 4 European countries at the moment. We're working under 4 different sets of rules. We've had to, in some cases, open companies in various countries so that we can operate there. We're using and taking on board more EU resources. So that in itself has created what I see as a challenge that we didn't have, well, before COVID, actually. And I think now that COVID's gone, people are just beginning to realise that the rules in Europe have changed. But as I mentioned earlier, you know, it's a big world. There's work to be done, you know, in Asia, in North America, South America, etc., etc. I think contractors are probably going to have to change their style of operation if they want to grow overseas and enter into partnerships with local organisations. Obviously, the logistics of what we do, in other words, sending individuals to other countries to do their job, is a lot simpler than a contractor having to send a workforce. And therefore, to actually operate overseas, I think, you know, at distance, very much partnerships with local organisations where people bring, you know, certain skill sets to the table, certain experiences to the table, and there's a more sharing of the pie perhaps than there is at the moment.
Would you have done anything differently in the 30 years?
I think that's the sort of sliding doors question, isn't it? Because you never know what you might have done differently that would have changed everything going forward. It's a very difficult question, and it's a question that people love to ask, especially when they're journalists. But I think what I would say is that, you know, I set out with a goal, and that goal was for RVA, not necessarily to be the biggest. You know, we never chased money, we chased delivery, and being the best at what we could do. And in my view, you know, we are up there with the best, if not the best, you know, in our sector. So would I have done anything differently? I can't answer that question. All I know is that it may have changed the course of destiny. So I'm very proud of what the company's achieved and the people that are in it, and I'm happy with where we sit in 2022, 30 years down the line.
Excellent. Well, Richard Vann, founder and managing director of the RVA Group, thank you very much for your time. And if you people out there want to read more of Richard, he's in the D&Ri print and digital issues and on our website. So there's a lot of good stuff to get into there. Thanks again, Richard.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, Steve.